Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Ottawa, Canada on November 5th, 2024. Today is the election in the United States, and we happen to be at the Embassy of the Russian Federation in Ottawa in order to talk to Russia's ambassador to Canada about the election and a whole range of topics that are of concern to Canadians and are having significant impacts on international relations at this time. The Russian ambassador to Canada is Oleg Stepanov. He began his post here in 2021. He graduated from Moscow State University of International Relations in 1994 with a master's degree in international journalism and public relations. He then joined the Department of North America of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His previous postings abroad include Consulate General of Russia in San Francisco, Embassy of Russia in Tbilisi, Georgia, and the Embassy of Russia in Washington, D.C. as a senior counselor, head of political external section. Obviously, Ambassador Stepanov has considerable experience in the course of our interview. He said, I think, in the range of 30 years dealing with both Canada and the United States. I want to be very clear because nowadays, speaking to Russian officials is a treacherous business in this country. It shouldn't be. I initiated this interview on my own. This was not a request that came from the Russian embassy. Rather, I reached out to the embassy and asked to speak to Ambassador Stepanov. And the basic reason for that is I think Canadians would benefit from hearing directly from the representative of the Russian Federation here in Canada, something that the Canadian media doesn't seem to be particularly interested in doing. I shouldn't have to say this, but I've received no compensation for this, nor have I sought any compensation. This is entirely an initiative of my own expense. I sat down today for over an hour with Ambassador Stepanov. You're about to hear our discussion. I think you'll find it informative, and I suggest to my fellow Canadians that they listen with an open mind, and maybe they'll gain some additional enlightenment as to what we can do to bring to an end this horrible war in Ukraine and de-escalate the tensions between the West and Russia, which is, after all, not only a very large and important state, but one that has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. So it behooves us to listen and to be open-minded, and I hope in that spirit you will approach this interview. Ambassador Stepanov, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today.
Thank you for coming.
This is the first time we've actually met in person, but we'd had an occasion to speak directly to each other. I think it was by Zoom back in April of last year when I contacted you and asked you for some guidance because I was going to Russia for the first time. So I wanted to thank you in person because it was really an extraordinary trip. I learned a great deal.
Glad to hear.
And I look forward to returning to Russia one day soon. So I'd like to start with the beginning of your assignment to Canada as the ambassador to the Russian Federation. I understand your posting began about 10 months prior to the commencement of the special military operation in February of 2022. So you had some experience of being the ambassador prior to that point in time. And of course, a good deal of time has passed since February 2022. Could you talk to us about the level of communication you have experienced with the Canadian government? And has there been, because my impression is that there's very little dialogue between our two governments. It seems as though all Western governments, not just the Canadian government, have no interest in talking to representatives of the Russian Federation. Does that more or less summarize your experience here? And have you noticed a change in the attitude of government officials since February of 2022?
Well, February 2022 became like a stake pole dividing two periods, right, in our relations. Before that, they were a bit frosty because of the Crimea and the aftermath of the Crimea vote situation and the coup d'etat that took place in Kiev that was supported by many Western governments. Unfortunately, when the democratically elected President Yanukovych, so unpopular but democratically elected, was ousted by force. But anyway, I came here with a clear mandate from my government, and both in my personal conviction that we need to improve relations with Canada, because we are neighbors. Geography dictates. We are not going anywhere. We are two largest countries in the world, territorially, with similar environmental, geographical challenges. Polar circle, permafrost, most of our territories lie beneath the polar circle. So I was thinking that by a policy of small steps of improvement, we can stabilize and advance our relations. Because there are two things, obviously, when we are talking about relations between nations. It's relations between peoples and relations between governments. And if relations between governments, they fluctuate, they can change. But the interest of the people to live in predictable, friendly, neighborly environment is obvious. So that was my idea. And there was a very intensive scope of communications with the government of Canada before February 2022. And obviously everything drastically changed.
Did you feel that you were making progress up until that point in time, up until February 2022?
I was thinking so, because there were tentative steps toward each other. Because prior to the Ukrainian crisis, we had many areas of cooperation in space, in aviation, in railroad construction, equipment exchanges, agricultural exchanges as well. So the bilateral trade war was not huge. If we are taking the potential of our countries. It was about $2.5 billion US dollars, approximately. It's a...
This was the annual trade turnover.
It was the annual before the Ukrainian crisis. Now it's 80 million.
Wow, almost nothing.
Almost nothing. It's peanuts. Yes, and so the idea was through business contacts, through people-to-people contacts, through academic contacts, through kind of politological discourse, try to bring us closer together. I had extensive plans to travel all across Canada and to meet all the local governments and to discuss possible areas of cooperation with every region. But once again, February 2022, everything changed. The federal government gave signal from top to the bottom. Just to cut all the relations with Russia, and I think it's quite sad, because it's very easy to destroy, but very difficult to rebuild. And once again, Mr. Trudeau doesn't like President Putin. That's okay. But kind of spreading that to the level of provinces and Russian regions and cutting all the financing for academic exchanges, cutting all the financing for student exchanges, people-to-people contacts. I don't think it's a very far-sighted policy.
Mm-hmm. The president of the Russian Federation has had occasion to use the word vassal to describe some Western governments. I can't recall him ever actually identifying the Canadian government as a vassal, but I have. I feel strongly, and there's no one watches my program will be surprised to hear me say that I feel that Canadian foreign policy is dictated from Washington, now more so than ever. Is that your impression? Do you feel that Canada exercises an independent foreign policy, or is it largely driven by decisions of the US government?
We remember good times of Prime Minister Trudeau the Senior, when the policy of Canada was really independent. During Cold War, he was not afraid to go to the Soviet Union with the official visit. He was the author of the hockey diplomacy, and at the time Canada played really significant moderating role in international affairs. Of course, being a member of NATO, being a close ally of the United States, but still having independent policy. I talked to the academicians in Moscow who dedicate their life studying Canada-US relations, Canada-Russia relations, and they transmitted the impression to me that since probably Harper administration or even earlier, Canadian foreign policy became more dependent on the decision makers in Washington. Mm-hmm. But here I'm kind of treading on thin ice because I'm not supposed to judge.
Understood. You'll be accused of foreign interference, perhaps.
You know, but obviously, what we see it's kind of just a practical observation that now at least foreign policy of Prime Minister Trudeau's cabinet is very closely dependent or allied with what's going on in Washington. And I'm a journalist by education. I'm a diplomat by trade, but I'm a journalist by education, and I very closely monitor the media all around. Mm-hmm. And right now, when we are watching the US elections, and prior to the election campaign, sometimes what I see on CBC, for example, on CTV, it looks like it's those elections taking place here, not in the United States. So you understand my impression.
Yes, yeah. I'd like to refer to Canada as the 51st state, except we don't have a right to vote, so we're not even a state. But in any case, that's just my opinion.
But I want to tell you one thing, that I'm a career diplomat. I've been dealing with North America mostly with the United States for 30 years. That's my 30 years in the foreign ministry. And when I came here, I was under the impression that Canada is a sort of continuation of the United States. But being here for more than 3 years. I understand that Canada is a completely different country, of course. Different traditions, different people, different attitudes, different political system. So I would reject the note that Canada is somehow is an annex to the United States. Canada is an independent country with its own tradition, with its own unique political system and unique people.
Right. It certainly can be all of those things. Let us hope that in the years ahead, Canada will exercise a greater degree of independence. I want to talk to you exactly about the media. You mentioned the Canadian media. Prior to coming here today, I did some quick Google searches, and I think the most recent article in the Canadian mainstream, they call it mainstream, media, in which you were quoted, was from March of this year. I don't know if that's the most recent one in which you were actually quoted. Your press officer, Vladimir, kindly informed me that you recently managed to get a letter published in the Hill Times,
yes,
relating, I believe, to Nazis who came to Canada. But certainly the overall impression one has is that the Canadian media, the mainstream media again, really aren't particularly interested in hearing from you, particularly since February of 2022. Is that your sense as well? Do you think they're making a concerted effort not to hear from representatives of the Russian Federation? Or do you find that they give you fair opportunity to have your views expressed to Canadians?
Well, at some point, we came under the impression that there was kind of a widespread signal not to give us a big podium. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we communicate with the outlets of mainstream media, but it's kind of a one-way cooperation. So when they need to ask questions, we answer. But when we want to express our opinion, it's hard to get through. And interestingly, the media from Quebec is more kind of flexible and more pluralistic and democratic when kind of communicating with us than the media from here. Mm-hmm. But we have our social media, our Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, Facebook and everything. So we have an opportunity to kind of be heard and to convey our opinion. We'll be trying to put it on a more equal basis, but yes, if put it concisely, I came under the impression that several months ago there was kind of a signal from somewhere to limit kind of Q&A with us.
Right. Well, I'm just curious, when was the last time you actually had a sit-down interview, either here or in a studio with a Canadian reporter? Have you had one this year, prior to today?
When was it?
I don't remember the month, but one interview from Tbilisi media came to us. Ben Manuch.
That was this year?
This year, yeah.
And that was the only one this year you had a sit-down?
And Mr. Moss, I believe, from Hill Times also came.
This year.
Not this year, end of the night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's not very often.
That's clear. So it's increasingly clear, Ambassador, to objective observers that the situation in Ukraine has become quite dire for the Ukrainian military. We were hearing a narrative for quite some time in the West that Ukraine was winning or on the verge of winning, that the Russian Federation's army was suffering catastrophic losses and so forth. And then after the attempted offensive last summer, which I think most military experts, if they're being honest, regarded as a catastrophe for Ukraine, Russia's military forces appear to have gone on the offensive, and they seem to be advancing pretty much all over the line of contact, particularly in the Donbass. And this is now reflected in the Western mainstream media. So, for example, The Economist published an article recently, The Economist, which is very unfriendly to the Russian Federation, as I'm sure you know, which was titled, Ukraine is now struggling to survive, not to win, something along those lines. And then there was a paper, an article in the New York Times in the last few days, where for the very first time they said this is no longer a stalemate, which is a way that the Western media like to describe the conflict. So is it your assessment, the assessment of the government of the Russian Federation, that Ukraine's military is indeed in a state of decline, retreat, collapse, whatever the appropriate word may be? And if so, do you feel that this is somehow, that you sense any change in the attitude of the Ukrainian government and its Western partners towards negotiations with the Russian Federation? Do you see any indication whatsoever that they are cognizant of the military reality and now want to have a serious discussion with the Russian Federation?
No. We don't feel any serious attempts or indications to approach with serious negotiations, but at this point there is no basis for negotiations actually, because Mr. Zelensky and his supporters inside and outside making big money out of this conflict at the sake of the lives of ordinary Ukrainians who are used as actually cannon fodder, right? So those adventurism to invade Kursk Oblast of Russia, what's that for? And as my president said, there was a clear set of goals that Russia set prior to the beginning of the special military operation. By the way, operation started only because on the other side, the Ukrainian government, the Kiev regime, they were preparing a sort of blitzkrieg against Donbass, amassing huge amount of material and personnel for that operation. So our special military operation was kind of a preemptive move, which we tried to avoid for many years. But if you remember the Minsk agreements that were concluded honestly on our side, that were practically meant to end the conflict and steadily move toward peaceful solution in Ukraine. When Chancellor Merkel retired. When President Hollande retired, they said they signed those agreements only to give Ukraine a time frame and ability to rearm itself to start the offensive again. So now, returning to your question, now there is no basis for negotiations because Ukrainian side continues to throw people into the war. The Western supporters or sponsors of Mr. Zelensky continue to provide equipment, armaments to the regime, and I don't see how under these circumstances we can really sit together with the other side. And obviously Mr. Zelensky is not a sovereign leader of the country. So the negotiations, when and if they take place, should be conducted first with bigger guys. Right? And again, denazification, which means getting rid of glorification of all the Nazi collaborators in Ukraine. Demilitarization, which means making Ukrainian armed forces, police forces very compact. Respect for human rights and language and national minorities. And if you're talking about Russia, maybe it's a majority even, right? But at least respect for the language and the ability of people to be upbrought in their own tradition, be it religious tradition, be it linguistic tradition, be it cultural tradition, right? Ability to elect local officials as in any democratic country, etc., etc., etc. So there is a number of conditions that has to be preemptively agreed upon when and if they want those negotiations started. I always tell my Canadian counterparts about a wonderful example of Canada. One country, two languages, French and English. French-speaking person is entitled to receive services in French in British Columbia. And English-speaking person is entitled to receive the same treatment in Quebec. And every politician here, when he or she speaks, either in parliament or locally, speaks one paragraph in French, one paragraph in English, and etc. Ukraine always used to be bilingual country, mostly Russian speaking, but okay, Russian Ukrainian speaking. And I was asking my friends here at Global Affairs, everywhere, why don't you promote the same conditions, the same attitude in Ukraine, where Ukrainian president, like here, Prime Minister Trudeau, speaks something in Ukrainian and something in Russian. And I never heard an answer. Why you try to Ukrainize, to eliminate all the Russian culture from Ukraine? And it's not only Russian culture, because there are Hungarian minorities, Slovak minorities, Bulgarian minorities, Romanian minorities, Crimean Tatarian minorities, and everything. But trying to Ukrainize that country, that's what brought that divide and conflict. Because since 1992, when Soviet Union collapsed, none of the presidents of Ukraine, be it pro-Russian Kuchma, Yanukovych, or more or less pro-Western Yushchenko and Kravchuk, they never found the courage to say that we are all Ukrainians, we are moving forward, we are a democratic country, everybody is welcome, we are moving forward. They took the very narrow nationalistic approach from the western part of Ukraine and tried to spread it to the rest of the country. And in 2014, when Maidan happened, when Yanukovych was ousted, and what was the first move of new temporary parliament of Ukraine? First draft law was to forbid Russian language all over Ukraine. Look, a third of Ukraine is Russian speaking, especially Donbass and Crimea. And that was the indicator for those people, what's going to happen to them, that their culture actually is going to be eradicated in a very harsh medieval way. And that's why Crimea stood against that. And that's why the west of Ukraine rebelled, the Donbass rebelled, because they felt that the natural cultural existence is threatened. That was the root of the current crisis.
I've heard at least some people suggest that the root goes back even further. And there's a gentleman by the name of Andrei Martyanov who was, he has a YouTube program. He was an officer in the Soviet Navy. And then in the 1990s, he emigrated to the United States, and he has a regular program. He's been very critical about Western policy towards Ukraine and the Ukraine war. And he said something very interesting the other day. He said that what is happening today in Ukraine are the final battles of World War II. Do you think there's any truth to that?
I would go even deeper in history. Probably it's a continuation of the civil war since 1917.
Interesting.
Yeah, because you see, it's a fratricidal conflict, because every Ukrainian in Ukraine has a relative in Russia, and every Russian in Russia has a relative in Ukraine. Part of my own family come from Luhansk. You talk to people here at the embassy, 1/3 of them have relatives either in Mariupol or Kiev or somewhere else. And it has a very deep internal dimension. It's not only international one; it's an internal one.
I'd like to turn now to a different theater of conflict, and that's the wars in West Asia. Actually, before I do that, I want to talk about one other thing that's happened in Eastern and Central Europe over the past few years, and that was the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, immediately upon the sabotage having occurred, various Western media outlets put forward the rather dubious proposition that the Russian Federation had destroyed its own pipeline. But that unsubstantiated allegation didn't last very long. And eventually, new theories began to be advanced. And attention began to be focused upon murky characters in Poland and Ukraine and so forth. And in the midst of all of this speculation about what really happened, a highly regarded investigative journalist by the name of Seymour Hersh issues a lengthy expose on the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. He states that he has sources inside the US government who are knowledgeable about this. His article is very detailed, and his claim in a nutshell is that the Biden administration was behind the destruction of Nord Stream, along with cooperative governments in Northern Europe. I think he identified in particular the Norwegian government. And this was met almost with a deafening silence by the Western media and Western governments. Some of them went off, the Germans, the Danes, and did their own investigations, never really told us what the outcome of those was. And now the latest theory circulating in the West is that some Ukrainians were in fact behind it, but without the knowledge of Volodymyr Zelensky. And apparently they used a small vessel and they got drunk or something like this. It's, again, a rather dubious story. And in the midst of all of this, there was an interesting piece of information that came out recently in Denmark. The Danish press reported that Coast Guard, an officer in the Danish Coast Guard, a few days before the destruction of Nord Stream, detected US naval vessels in the area where the sabotage occurred, and they had turned off their, I believe it's called transponders, so they couldn't be identified. And he went out there and he was told to leave and not to report to anyone what he had seen. And for months he remained silent, and finally he decided to tell the public. So with all of that as background, does the Russian Federation have an official position as to what actually happened to Nord Stream? And if so, what is the official position of the Russian government?
Well, I believe the chief of our intelligence said quite explicitly that it's only the expertise of the United States and Great Britain that could allow that to happen. Any suggestion that a couple of Ukrainian divers can do that, it's not feasible. I'm a scuba diver myself. I know how difficult such an operation could be. Only specially trained forces can undertake such a complex operation. And I don't know, was it President Putin said, some of our top officials said that CIA has no alibi in that case. You see, geopolitically, United States quite openly proclaimed, have been proclaiming for a number of years that they need to do something to cut energy cooperation between Germany and Russia. And in every case like this, I always ask who benefits. Who benefits, right? Mm-hmm. So what happened? The pipeline is blown. Germany is on a short leash of very tiny gas supplies through secondary sources, and the United States obviously planning to flood the Europe with its liquefied gas. Whether it's possible or not, I don't know, but what I'm reading now is that BASF concern is closing its factories in Germany, relocating to the United States probably. Volkswagen is near bankruptcy. The cost of production all over Germany rose about 15% because they don't have access to Russian gas. So doing that, the United States obviously just killing the major powerhouse in Europe. At the same time, kind of making the transatlantic chain stronger, mm-hmm. and bringing European Union closer to the United States, depriving European Union of that strategic independence that European Union was striving for, mm-hmm. for so many years. So it's a big geopolitical game, and obviously it's not a couple of over-enthusiastic Ukrainian guys on a yacht who did that.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I would like to talk to you now, turn to the other major theater of war in the world today, and that is West Asia. Recently, Israel launched an attack on the Iranian Islamic Republic. There are dramatically different narratives about the success of the attack, but it's clear that some targets were struck because the Iranian government admitted that several of its soldiers were killed. And there have been reports that the Israelis were unable to achieve their objectives or even come close to achieving their objectives because of the Iranian air defenses, and possibly also some electronic warfare equipment that they found to be rather effective, the Israelis. And so after I believe it was after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran by Israel, it may have been earlier than that. It may have been after the destruction of the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Mm-hmm. I believe the former defense minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Shoigu, went to Iran. And around the time that he went to Iran, there were reports circulating that a number of military transport planes there was a rather heavy traffic of military transport planes from the Russian Federation to Iran. And some American military experts, independent people like Scott Ritter, Douglas McGregor, were saying that they understood that the Russian Federation was providing advanced air defense systems and electronic warfare equipment to Iran. Are you able to say whether those reports are accurate? And whatever you may or may not be able to say about that, the Russian Federation has made clear that its relationship with Iran is of strategic importance. Will the Russian Federation assist Iran in some way if it comes under attack from the United States?
Well, Iran is our neighbor. our historic neighbor, friendly country, very good relations between our peoples. And it's no secret that we have rather extensive technical military cooperation with Iran. Mm-hmm. I'm not privy to what equipment was sent or not, but obviously cooperation is there. And but if taking a bigger picture, when I used to be a policy planner for the Russian Foreign Ministry, I had a chance to have consultations with my counterparts, both in Israel and Iran. And especially to Israelis, I was saying that it's your policy towards Iran is not feasible. Iran is a great civilization, ancient civilization with its traditions, center of Shia Muslim world. It always gonna project its influence outside its borders. Neither Israel nor the United States can corner or box Iran. Mm-hmm. So as every strong civilization, it's gonna project its influence. And the main task is to try to find courage both in Israel and Iran to understand that the projection of that influence, of that power, would be positive. Mm-hmm. There are no unsolvable solutions there. But unfortunately, in Israel, Iranian topic or other topics like Palestinian topics and everything, it's played very narrow for the just purposes of domestic political struggle. Mm-hmm. That's it. But it has very wide regional implications, mm-hmm.
Unfortunately. So, returning or focusing on the question of Palestine, mm-hmm. As I'm sure you know, the International Court of Justice on January 26 ruled, in essence, that it's plausible that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. The official death toll now is about 43,000, according to the Gaza Health Ministry in Gaza, and estimates are that 70% of those are women and children. A UN independent committee just concluded that Israel is committing the crime against humanity of extermination by destroying the healthcare system in Gaza. The Lancet, a British medical journal, a prestigious medical journal, came out with an estimate that direct and indirect deaths caused by Israel's attacks on Gaza may be in excess of 200,000 persons. So if 70% of those are civilians, we're talking about 140,000 women and children and non-military men. In all of this, I could go on and on, of course. There are many of us who believe in the legal community. I happen to be a lawyer myself, that what Israel is doing clearly constitutes a genocide under the terms of the Genocide Convention of 1948. The Russian Federation has been quite critical of Israel's actions in Palestine, particularly Gaza. I've noted in particular the commentary and the tone of the Russian Federation's ambassador to the United Nations. He's used some rather harsh language to describe it. But I'm curious to know would the Russian Federation go so far as to agree with the proposition that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide? And if not, how would you describe what is happening in Gaza from the perspective of international law?
Well, of course, to coin the term is up to the UN court, right?
The ICJ, you mean the International Court of Justice, right?
ICJ. Obviously, what we see is indiscriminate war of extermination against ordinary Palestinians. It's not how it is presented in mainstream media, like Israeli-Hamas war, for example. No, of course not. It goes much further, and under the guise of that pretext. So we, of course, condemn any acts of terror, and the 7th of October was a bad and unacceptable move on part of Hamas, but the response is absolutely unproportional and horrible. I totally agree with you that women, children die because of indiscriminate shelling and bombing, and we totally condemn such actions, because one may strongly suspect that under the guise of so-called anti-terrorist operation, Israel might be decided much wider geopolitical goal of kind of just swallowing Palestine, right? Mm-hmm. But once again, it's whatever the result, the equilibrium is not tenable. Mm-hmm. And Israel is not gonna feel safer because of those actions. It's gonna find itself in a more precarious situation. Once again, and we were sending that signal quite clearly, directly to the Israelis, that in the long term, with such policies, you lose. Mm-hmm. You will marginalize yourself first, then you'll just find more enemies around you. And the threats to your security will grow exponentially. It's not diminish. Mm-hmm. It's gonna grow. That's why we strongly advocate for ceasefire, stop fighting, stop bombing, stop shelling, stop killing people, returning back to negotiations if they are possible at this point, or mm-hmm. if they are possible tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And to return to internationally adopted formula. We know that. Mm-hmm. Two-state solution, borders of 1968, with possible small territorial exchanges, independent Palestine recognized by international community. And then Israel will be able to normalize steadily, step by step, normalize the relations with the rest of the Arab world, and then Israel will feel safe.
But to get to that point, would you agree with me that more must be done, and that one way in which pressure can be exerted on Israel to finally give the people of Palestine a sovereign state would be economic sanctions of the type, for example, that have been leveled extensively by Western countries against Russia? Is that something that the Russian Federation has done or would contemplate doing in the case of Israel, applying well-targeted economic sanctions? And if not, why wouldn't it do that in a situation where a country has a position of dominance over an indigenous population and is using it to violate their rights systematically? I would think this is a perfect case for economic sanctions, no?
Well, 2-3 things. First of all, we never believed in unilateral economic sanctions. We believe that sanctions can be only introduced by the decision of the UN Security Council. Secondly, we don't cooperate with Israel on technical military issues. We don't trade, we don't provide, we don't buy. So there are no military cooperation.
So it's like a de facto arms embargo, basically.
Well, if you want to put that way,
right.
Yes, but we just don't do that.
Right.
Couple of more things. Probably a third of population of Israel people from Russia, former Soviet Union. So they are our compatriots, if you want to put it that way. And secondly, Russia have been playing a mediating role in the Middle Eastern settlement for decades, since the creation of Israel and Palestine, and we want to be able to communicate freely, both with Israel and support and support our Palestinian friends as well. In this role, we need to be more diplomatic, I would say, without any harsh moves. However, we understand where the moral compass shows today. Right.
Understood. So I'd like to return, before we conclude our discussion today, to this part of the world and talk to you about a subject that I'm sure you know dominates the public discourse in Canada, and it's foreign interference, alleged foreign interference in Canadian politics. And there's a committee in Parliament known as NSI-COP, the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliament. And I believe it was June of this year, under considerable pressure from the media, because there had been some leaks about alleged Chinese interference, they published an 84-page report, which initially had been classified. So they declassified it, but many of the passages were redacted, I see you're smiling. I had to hear your reaction to it. It seems to be similar to my own because I read it twice. And I must say, I was not able to find one shred of evidence anywhere in that document to back up any of the claims that were being made. And it seemed to me as a Canadian citizen that we were just being asked to trust the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, just trust them, even though they have a very checkered past, shall we say, when it comes to honesty. In any event, I wanted to read to you a couple of passages from this report. If you bear with me, they're a little bit lengthy, but I would like to get your reaction to them. So on page 11, the NSI COP stated, quote, in its 2019 review of the government response to foreign interference, the committee noted that the most significant perpetrators of foreign interference in Canada were the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, with the PRC representing the greatest foreign interference threat. And on the next page, it said, quote, however, contrary to its assessment in 2019, which noted that Russia was the second most significant foreign interference threat, the committee observed that Russia did not engage in foreign interference activities within the more narrow context of Canadian democratic institutions and processes. In this period of review, Canada was a lower level priority for Russia, which focused its efforts instead on other strategic priorities and its adversarial competition with the United States. And then finally on page 35, and this is the one that I'm most interested in getting your reaction to, Canada's strategic response to foreign interference in democratic processes and institutions must be understood in the context that brought the issue to the fore. As noted earlier, Russia carried out an influence campaign aimed at the United States in the 2016 presidential election with the goal of undermining public faith in the US democratic process and discrediting the candidacy of Hillary Clinton, close quote. And I should also add as a footnote that in recent days, the American media have started talking about this again, almost suggesting that the Russian Federation is currently engaged in some sort of interference activities in the United States to sway the outcome of the election that's happening today. I'm going to come back to the election later, but I just want to get your reaction to these allegations that this parliamentary committee is making, particularly the claim about 2016.
Well, this report said that Russia may represent a threat, but then Judge Og Commission said there were no traces of Russian interference.
Justice Hogue, yes, this is the ongoing foreign interference inquiry, right?
Exactly. So it's a, bluntly speaking, rather cheap game. So you are blaming Russia for what Russia is capable of, allegedly. Then you spin that for a couple of years, and then you say, no, there were no influence. Same in the United States, by the way. They recognize that in 2016 there were no Russian involvement in the election campaign. What they try to hide behind blaming Russia is that the Madam Clinton, Hillary Clinton election staff violated law. And the leaks of those emails clearly indicated violation of US laws. To cover that, they try to blame Russia, that Russia is kind of trying to smear Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But Russia was never involved. But Clintons were never kind of reprimanded or prosecuted for violation of US electoral laws during election campaigns due to those leaks. Same here. You can blame Russia, and I will be more than proud to think of my country as of omnipotent player that can kind of influence elections in every democratic country, but it's not the case. And as an expert, I can say that there are no there were no successful campaigns of influence, and there are no series of successful campaigns of influence to try to sway the electoral vote in a democratic country. Any campaign of such kind would be absolutely unpredictable in its results, and it's just not necessary. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For example, if we are talking here about Canada, what interest Russia would have to influence anything here at all? To influence a certain riding?
I've been asking myself that same question, sir,
yeah.
but
And,
I don't know what the answer is.
Again, taking into consideration the stance of the current liberal cabinet vis-à-vis Russia, which is very confrontational, and the many statements that have been already made by the conservative opposition regarding Russia, there are no Russian candidates here. Mm-hmm. Same about the United States. Either Trump or Harris, there is no difference for us, actually. Yes, my president have joked that we are supporting Kamala Harris, but you know, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's just a joke. And any notion, any allegations that Mr. Trump is a Russian candidate mm-hmm. is absolutely preposterous. Mm-hmm. Because if one remembers, it's exactly during the Trump presidential term the major part of sanctions against Russia were implemented by the United States and introduced. Mm-hmm. And the toughest stance against Russia was under President Trump at that time. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking at the presidential elections now, today, in the United States, there are no Russian candidates, but we'll respect the will of the American people, and we will hope for reassessment of the Russian policy in Washington. So there is a pragmatic approach. Like here, when I talk to my global affairs colleagues, I say, we shouldn't rock the boat further. We need to stabilize the relations. Okay, there are not gonna be love between us mm-hmm. in a foreseeable future, maybe. But we need to stabilize relations for the sake of our peoples and for the sake of our geographical proximity and our shared responsibility for the Arctic and many other things. So we need to become pragmatic, not ideological. That's the main thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to point out, if I recall correctly, it was the Trump administration that pulled out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was a very important treaty between the United States and Russia for nuclear arms control. And I believe his administration also did send weapons to Ukraine, did it not? During Trump's 4 years in the White House. I could be mistaken about that, but I thought that there were some weapons transfers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it is hard, and those are just some of the reasons why it's hard to believe that Trump was a friend of Russia. But I do want to just focus on one thing that he's been saying. He obviously has gone out of his way during this election campaign to say that he's going to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. He never, as far as I know, explains how he's going to do that. Seems inconceivable that that's going to happen without territorial concessions by Ukraine and giving up its hope of membership in NATO. But nonetheless, he says it. And the one time he debated Kamala Harris, personally, I felt this was the most important thing that was said by either candidate during the entire debate. He pointed out repeatedly that Russia has a massive nuclear arsenal and that this war was very dangerous for the whole world. So do you take that seriously? Do you think that is this just Donald Trump trying to appeal to a certain segment of the American electorate that is tired of the Ukraine war? Or do you think that this man actually does want to bring that war to an end?
Well, I agree that American electorate, the American consensus, is really tired of the Ukrainian topic, because there are so many problems at hand domestically, right? And I have reason to believe that he's sincere in what he's saying, but the devil in details and what practical steps can be taken, right? First, it's his vision that he's yet to articulate in a more concrete terms. Then it's his team that he assembles, because teams means a lot, right? And but for now, I don't see the concrete topic for negotiations where we can start, right? Because, we accepted 4 regions constitutionally in the Russian territory. Not of them yet under control of the Russian forces.
And just for the sake of our audience, I'll name them: Zaporozhye,
Kherson,
Donetsk,
yes, Donetsk, Lugansk,
right.
and etc. And the longer the conflict lingers, the more territories Zelensky regime is gonna lose. And if and when any negotiation start, it's gonna start from the reality on the ground, right? So let's wait and see who wins. And once again, we'll be ready to work with any administration, be it Democratic or Republican. We are ready to talk to them. If they're ready to talk to us, at least it's a starting point.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Ambassador. You've been very generous with it. We've gone on longer than we had anticipated, but I hope we can continue the conversation in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Oleg.